All right, so welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
So tell us about yourself as we begin the interview.
Thank you. My name is Christopher Gitari. I am a transitional justice advisor working in South Sudan and in a mechanism that's created by the peace agreement here called the Reconstituted Joint Monitoring Evaluation Commission. But in the past, I have worked at the International Center for Transitional Justice, ICTJ, as the country office director, or who they call head of office, and also the International Commission of Jurists. I'm a lawyer, passionate about human rights law, and really happy to be contributing to the TJ field. We especially in this region, in Kenya, South Sudan. Yes, very happy to do that. Thank you.
All right, awesome. So maybe you can hit on some of the work that you've been doing. What have been some of the highlights? What have been some of the sort of interesting aspects of the work that you've been doing?
I think overall, the work that I've been doing has been to advise the RJMEC on its monitoring and oversight on the transitional justice program that is here in South Sudan. And I therefore support the chairperson of the RJMEC in his mandate to oversight the implementation of this chapter by the government. There are a number of tasks the government of South Sudan is supposed to achieve within a transitional period within the peace process. And those tasks include establishment and operationalizing of a truth commission, and also operationalizing reparations mechanism. They also have a third mechanism which is supposed to be established but has had various challenges, that is a hybrid court. And this is a court on criminal accountability to pursue international crimes committed during the conflicts in 2013 and 2016. So that's my role, is just to advise and to support the chairperson of our JMEC as he oversights how these tasks are being implemented. But I also have a second role, which is I offer technical advice to stakeholders and other actors who are interested in pushing for the implementation of transitional justice in South Sudan, mostly civil society, victims, refugees, and internally displaced persons, and of course the diplomatic community when they need my support. So I play those two roles, and I think the highlight has been for me to engage with victims and refugees and to give them the TJ perspectives and how they can engage in these processes and to support their becoming in terms of agency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in this advisory role, in your experience so far, and that sounds like a really challenging role that you play, what have been some of the biggest challenges for human rights, justice, and transitional justice efforts in the work that you're doing with JMEC?
I think the biggest challenge is when you have the government not either fully on board or taking time to be fully on board. And because these processes are political processes, they require a lot of political will, and harnessing that political will, it takes time. And in a context where there are a lot of suspicion about the end effects or the end goals of transitional justice processes, the resistance can be very high, and these are challenges that we face quite often. I think the second is we're in a space where the safety and security of the country is still up in the air as a question to be settled, as an issue to be dealt with, and at the same time attempting to undertake transitional justice, you do get some pushback. So in terms of prioritization, South Sudan had to stabilize first and had to get the parties to trust one another to a certain point where they're able to then to undertake or attempt to undertake TJ. So in this context, I've seen that type of perspective. In another context, it is the political leaders also seeking to understand the four corners of transitional justice before figuring out how they can apply it based on their own ends and goals. And so that's usually the more difficult part to overcome before you then are able to get sort of the project on the road.
It's interesting that you say that. I think because the conversations, or at least the challenges to transitional justice internally, is how was initially envisioned as this sort of apolitical, ahistorical thing. It's supposed to just be a tool that's supposed to facilitate conversations. And I think it's quite interesting how you hit on the fact that it inherently is political. The issues, the conflicts that you're dealing with are political. The leadership itself is a political body. So I think that really does show a different side to what it was supposed to be, and what the challenges and the complexities that come with doing it. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, I suppose, it not being so political. Yeah. So in these sort of negotiations that you're having, this advisory role that you're playing, and as you witness sort of these challenges unfolding for transitional justice and for human rights and for justice in general. And you also spoke about, how complex it was stabilizing South Sudan first, and then trying to build the trust, and then, at the same time also still trying to bring the 4 pillars of transitional justice to life, essentially, in South Sudan. What are the initiatives, or what are the ways that you are working to make transitional justice a everyday conversation, an everyday practice, versus an event that just happens? We sign a few papers, tick a few boxes, write a report. But what are you doing for that to become a mindset thing, to become an everyday thing that people are working at and working towards on a daily basis?
That's a hard question, and not one that is necessarily at the forefront of my mind. But, to be honest, the way in which transitional justice has been applied in the past has always been this segmented, siloed approach, where it fits in this just one section. It's a chapter in a peace agreement. But in reality, it's this golden thread that weaves through the different aspects of the peace process. And you see it in the South Sudan peace agreement, where we know that there is a particular chapter on transitional justice, chapter 5. But then you find elements of transitional justice in other aspects. That is, if you were to look at the first chapter of the peace agreement on the formation of government and establishment of government at state level, they do have aspects of it when it comes to judicial reforms. We've always known judicial reforms has been and can be considered as part of general institutional reform within a TJ framework. And the manner in which those who are undertaking judicial reforms, they can, of course, adopt a rule of law approach, but they should also think about it from a scenario where part of the root cause of conflict is lack of justice and people's confidence in the justice sector, and therefore not being able to have a place to refer disputes when they have conflict with each other. So in that respect, when you undertake judicial reforms, not only bringing the rule of law perspective, and that it's good, from A.V. Dicey philosophy, that you have an institution which you can refer cases and where there's independence, but also that, from a TJ perspective, that reforming the judiciary should be to correct an error in the past and to ensure that in the future you can break the cycles of conflict by having a space to take disputes. And then the second chapter is on security sector reforms and transformation. Of course, that chapter has a permanent ceasefire and cessation of hostilities aspects. And of course, there is essentially the demand that security actors not to harm civilians. But there's also an aspect of it where they're supposed to come with security transformation policies. Now, the manner in which those policies, again, would be done should be and can be from a TJ perspective in terms of those who are in the rank and file of security sector and have committed very serious atrocities, what should be done to them? I think that's a conversation that is inevitable just to break cycles of conflict. What kind of accountability measures could be applied, whether externally or internally within the security organs? What new conduct should we expect from security sector actors? So when they develop those frameworks, do they have that in mind? And then also you have the third chapter, which is on humanitarian access and IDPs. And again, I said, when it comes to that, there's one, on the one end, durable solutions that you should be applying to, displaced persons and encouraging their return, but also what kind of role can they play in the TJ processes. So yes, TJ weaves through these chapters in various ways, and it should not be seen as this siloed, segmentized approach, and that it does actually feature in various aspects of the peace process.
And at the community level, how are communities in South Sudan sort of embracing these high sort of level things that we just spoke about? How do they come to understand it?
I think there's a lot of work that is required to be done by civil society and by local leaders to communicate TJ in a manner that makes them, understand. But that does not mean that they do not know it. I mean, they may lack a full understanding of the approaches that have been adopted at a national level or at a global level. But they've been practicing it in some shape or form through traditional justice processes. They have experiences of people-to-people peace processes where they come together and they seek to resolve conflict, and they sign agreements with each other and also undertake traditional ceremonies to symbolize and mark the commencement of a peace process or a peace agreement, memorializations of some kind of form in songs and dirges and any other ways. So it's not that there is no TJ approaches. They do have them, but they have them in their own way, and it's to find those and amplify those and use those to strengthen your approach towards a TJ at the grassroots level. Yeah.
I think I like what you just said. It's not that they don't know, because they already know what justice looks like for them. They just may not fully understand what the approaches look like. And I think that's a very important point to touch on, right? It's the fact that, we spend a lot of time writing the nice English for it and the terminology and all of that. But I guess it's also an inherent issue of, if you are someone seeking justice and you are someone seeking some kind of recognition and acknowledgement for things or violent things that have happened towards you, you also know inherently what should be done about it or what you'd like and expect from the situation.
Yeah, they do have like aspects of in a community forum where truth telling is encouraged without reprisals. They do have some elements of accountability where people are forced to pay compensation and they accept to pay compensation, whether collectively or individually. And they do have aspects where they slaughter a bull, a white bull, to symbolize the peace returning to the community. And they have remembrances in some way. And so you do have an eclectic experience in South Sudan. And I guess the idea is, and in other contexts, not only in South Sudan, but in other contexts. And I think the idea is to see what and how to amplify these experiences so that they can be used to support the really core goals of transitional justice, some of them being the disruption of cycles of conflict or addressing the root causes of conflict.
And what makes it challenging to amplify that? If it's the community levels, clearly seems people are engaged, people are interested and willing to do it if these kinds of processes are happening. What makes it hard for it to scale up?
And I think there's need for civil society and our actors in government to just really spend time with the communities and not have cavalier conversations, but really have deep and well thought out conversations on these issues and to deeply document and think about what those practices are and how they can be sort of bent towards TJ goals. So I think the difficulty is just the aspect of spending time with these communities and figuring out what these practices are and how they can be adapted. I'm happy that the Truth Commission, as per the peace agreement in South Sudan, is actually required to, engage with these types of approaches and give guidance where it can to these traditional actors. and that encouraging them to adopt these practices to suit the goals of TJ as envisaged in the peace process.
So, Chris, you have spoken quite passionately, quite deeply about these sort of nuances and things, and it makes me wonder, what's motivating you to do what you're doing? Why are you not, selling out for a finance job on Wall Street? What's motivating you? What's driving you?
Sometimes you think it's the path that just unveils itself in front of you as the easiest path to take, and usually that's what makes people very happy. You walk the path that just unveils in front of you, and to some degree, quite opposite, it's the unbeaten path. When we began our discussion on transitional justice back when I got involved in it, back in 2005, it was quite novel for me and for my peers. It was the unbeaten path. It was very exciting, and it's also the path that unveiled itself. So you have this path that's unveiling itself in front of me, but it's also the unbeaten path. It's very strange, right? So yeah, I think that's what happened when I got myself involved in TJ. And by the way, remembering that I'm actually a commercial corporate lawyer by training, but has dabbled in transitional justice and enjoyed it these years. Yes, and not that I no longer interact in the corporate commercial legal field. I mean, I do, but this is quite as passionate, and also because I guess we're trying to make a difference in our region. Our region has been known to be quite unstable. This is the Horn of Africa. You look at the number of conflicts we've had here, and I guess you want to be in that space where you can lend a hand and make a difference in the best we know how. And I think that's why I remain in this field and been very, very happy and passionate in it.
Interesting. So, 2005 was a great time to be in transitional justice. Exciting.
It wasn't really well known. We really didn't know what we were really talking about. But we had external help. I remember many actors like ICTJ were coming into the country in Kenya and in the region, and I think that helped a lot. I think also the fellowship programs they put together for young people to allow them to have deep immersion conversations with TJ. I was actually in Cape Town for over 3 weeks, where really that seed on transitional justice was really now properly nurtured. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm thankful to South Africa for the South African experience for that. And I think more of those should be had. And I think the network should really reflect on what kind of fellowship programs it can have for young Africans to plant those seeds and to nurture them so that we can have TJ actors sprouting on the continent and really driving these processes forward.
And, as you reflect and sort of look back on your career and looking at it, what it is now, and, the discussions, the negotiations, the challenges that we've just discussed, when we're looking forward, what are the pressing concerns for transitional justice in South Sudan? And what is the thing that's keeping you up at night?
I think we are concerned about how deep the political commitment is to TJ, and whether through successive governments, and I've seen it back home in Kenya, where I come from, where successive governments come in with different perspectives, and maybe TJ is not one of them. And we've seen it in other contexts, whether it's Colombia or other spaces, and that's not good for TJ because we need a level of commitment for a number of years and succeeding elections where TJ remains front and center, where it can hold these transformative goals through. And it requires long-term commitment that should succeed different governments. So therefore the question is, beyond the cyclical elections, can we have TJ work through those election processes? But in a post-conflict country like South Sudan, I think the real conversation also is that the political leaders cultivate deeper trust with each other, cultivate deeper political bonds, and that they're able to be politically reconciled to give leadership to transitional justice processes. Because it's often you forget that actually is the political leaders who implement transitional justice, and we're only just supporting it. So it's to encourage that they are politically reconciled with each other and with their various constituents, so that they can be able to give leadership to these processes. And whenever there's fracturing of the political leadership, transitional justice does take a dent.
That's quite interesting. I think it's, for lack of a better word, this is sort of, you're talking about the sustainability of these processes. Now everyone uses the word sustainability now, but making it
I have
last.
to jump off at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Making it last through these sort of cycles. And I think that's really important to talk through. But thank you. We've got through all our questions.
Yeah.
Thank you for making the time, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you,
further.
for your energy and your vivaciousness. I really like it. It's very infectious.
No worries, Chris.